This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we are live with Dr. Valcine Brown, and we're going to talk about literary research, literacy and research, and some other topics. And you're a veteran teacher in the high school English language arts and serving in public education. And we're going to talk about creative writing and curriculum and the connection between literacy and economic prosperity. But I want to welcome you again to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing today?
Thank you so much, Phantom, for having me on. I am doing quite well. How about yourself?
I'm doing fine. Today is our second podcast. We had two today. This will be the second one,
Oh,
and
wow.
we've been podcasting since 2016, and we've actually this will be episode 1194.
Woo.
So we've been out in the podcast space before it was cool, and we were initially audio, and now we're video, and we're audio and video on multiple platforms.
Nice.
And yeah, it's just cool to be out here talking to people with different hats on. We try to talk to people from a creative perspective, but
Hmm.
also from people who are own their own concepts or their vision, and they have
Hmm.
something to say, and they want to get that out in the world, and we want to
Hmm.
be able to be like a megaphone for that. So, a couple of questions before we get to the heart of your story. We ask every guest, what motivates you, and why do you do what you do?
I am motivated because I see the importance of education. I'm also specifically motivated in my field because I love reading and writing and talking about reading and writing and having that opportunity to utilize different lenses to analyze literature. It makes me happy. It's my happy spot.
That's your happy spot. Yeah, being a
Yeah.
creator, I've talked to a lot of writers. Like initially, I talked to singer songwriters. Then I talked to artists. I talked to filmmakers, I talked to directors, and the key component is people are creating stories.
Hmm. Hmm.
Everybody tells a story whether they write it down or not. Like and
Yes.
and when people start to really get deep, when you talk to an author, or you talk to a film director or a film like a
Hmm.
screenplay writer, a teleplay writer, poet, speech writer, TEDx type of person that goes on to
Hmm.
TEDx, the webinar type of people. They really focus on messaging. They focus on
Hmm.
their content. How do you actually hook people in? Like, how do you
Mhm,
actually get people
mhm,
pulled into a story? How do you keep their attention with all the noise in the world?
mhm.
And being a child of the '70s, we didn't have all these distractions,
Yes,
and
yeah.
now we do. So how do you get people to uh, to understand the importance of literature? Because they're all on the phone, doom
Ooh.
scrolling, and they don't want to read Moby Dick. They don't want to read Pride and Prejudice. They don't want to read Shakespeare. You know, they don't want to read the Harlem Renaissance poetry. It's like how do you get people to understand the importance of that?
That's very interesting you asked the question, and that was part of what started me on my journey to earning my PhD, having students who said reading is boring. Now, I was taken aback by that. I was like, "What? What do you mean it's boring? I can go anywhere in a story. What are you talking about?" But through the conversations in my classroom with students, I was able to narrow down just from their feedback about when they started finding reading boring. They loved it in elementary school where they had choice, trips to the library with their teacher, and the time in the class to read where they were reading a book that they chose. So I
Mm,
said, well, something has to be done about this. And through having colleagues, having conversations with my colleagues, um, the fact that the literary canon in terms of what's taught in high school, it's not keeping up with the demographics that we're educating today. And
mm.
one of my colleagues said it perfectly. She said, we're just keep reading the same stories by dead white guys. And I was like, that is true. And so going back to school to get my PhD, I knew that I wanted to focus on revamping curriculum. How can we make it so that students are interested in reading? Because literacy is the key to every other discipline. It is the key to success, regardless of what you want to do. You need to be able to read, write, and communicate well.
Yeah, it's really
And
yeah.
yeah, it's key to everything. And what I ended up doing my dissertation on was the impact of mirror books on sophomore students' attitude towards reading.
Mm.
Now, mirror books are books through which a student can see themselves reflected, either racially, socially, and economically, through the lens of their culture. And then when you're having those conversations with students about that, that opens their eyes. And so with my dissertation, I did measure that access to choice and mirror books does improve a student's attitude towards reading. Now, it wasn't improved to the measure that you would call it statistically significant, but there was an improvement. And so I got one answer to a question, but then I also had more questions. So I'm going back to the table to do some more research. My next research is going to be on if measuring if there is a correlation between students' attitude towards reading and their Lexile level. So we might make the assumption that students who have a lower disposition towards reading automatically might have a lower Lexile level. But until you've actually measured it and can draw that statistical correlation, it's an assumption on our part. So I still have a lot more questions. So far, I've only gotten a sliver of an answer, but I'm going back to the table to do some more research. And in terms of my particular classroom, I give my students a lot of choice. And I'm thankful that I work in a district where we are required to teach the standards, but I have choice and autonomy on what text that we read. So I like to give my students choice. I will bring in 3 or 4 novels, we'll read the synopsis on the back, and we'll say, okay, well, which one of these do we want to vote? And the democratic principles hold that we read what is chosen. With my more advanced classes, my AP Lit class, I will actually divide them into sections. They say, okay, well, we want to read this, but we want to read that. And so I'll have 2 books going on at the same time. But I find that they are engaged when they get the opportunity to choose, because there's something within that text that they connect with and they enjoy dissecting it and critically analyzing it to get at the heart of what drew them in.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me, because I had a liberal arts education. I went to Bowdoin College. I was a sociology, government legal studies double major.
Yes.
And the mindset was like the Socratic method, blue books, oral exams, not using SAT multiple choices. So you had
Mhm.
that critical thinking and processing of
Yes.
an idea. And, I got into IT, but I never took comp sci. What I was able
Yeah.
to do is leverage the ability to learn. And so the ability to learn, I wasn't locked into just being and what we find sometimes is people who are just into STEM, right? The people who are just doing the math and the science and the logic and the physics. Sometimes when you get into an IT organization, you need somebody that's like a liberal arts major that actually can do research, that actually can
Yes.
write. And I am the bridge in my role in business. I am a business system analyst, and then there's a programmer. I talk to the C-suite. I talk to the users, and I find out what they want, and I come up with user stories, use cases, all kinds of concepts that are basically research papers to find out what is the business problem, and then I can bridge and understand enough about the programmers and actually translate that to the programmers so they can code it.
Yes.
So there is a point where it's like, whoa, thought I had to be a mathematician to be in IT. No, there are multiple roles. And so
Mhm.
learning how to process, like where you're teaching reading comprehension and like critical thinking after you read a book that you
Yes.
can talk about, like Richard Wright, and you can talk
Oh,
about the Invisible Man, like the Black
yes.
Invisible Man, not the
Yes.
sci-fi Invisible Man, or like
Invis
Francis Fan and the Wretched of the Earth. Or you read something, or you read, you know, like like a lot of the classic stuff. I don't know.
Mhm.
I read a lot of things in Black History,
Mhm. Mhm.
Huey P. Newton and Soul on
Mhm.
Ice, things that
Mhm.
would
Mhm.
gravitate.
James Baldwin, The Fire
James
Next
Baldwin,
Time.
Fire Next Time, things like
Yes.
that, that would like, draw you in. But I also read, the Moby Dick and William Blake and Tennyson, and I got into Victorian poetry, and I like
Mhm.
Shakespeare. But
Mhm.
the idea is like Yeah, I understand these are like white culture, dominant culture,
Mhm.
but there's some things that you can learn from the other culture, and we should
Mhm.
have a kind of blend. Uh,
Yes.
and if you don't get the history on all sides, from Native
Mhm.
American, Asian history,
Mhm.
every
Mhm.
everything you can consume will
Absolutely.
actually benefit you.
Absolutely. When you talk about integrating and reading about different cultures, the terms are really mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. So, mirrors we talked about already, and windows are when you are reading about the culture of others, the race of others, and you can use it to learn more, expand your understanding of the world around you outside your immediate space. And then sliding glass doors is the interpretation of walking between the different cultures and really becoming engaged in cross-cultural movements. So yeah.
I think it's real important for people to understand because sometimes what I found is some people, like, they would think, well, IT is full of guys like Bill Gates
Mhm,
and Steve Jobs and Elon
mhm,
Musk, and I don't see somebody like me. So
mhm.
then I don't feel that I'm welcome.
Representation.
Yeah. And it is a hard road when you're the one person in the room or the two people in the room. And
Yes.
they tend to kind of poo-poo your critical thinking, which tends to be this
Mhm,
kind of social Darwinism that's done on black
mhm.
folks, that
Yep.
you can't be in that room because you don't think at the level you need to
Mhm.
be in that room.
Stereotypes. Yeah.
Stereotypes and
Stereotypes, because and if you think about it, that says a lot about their lack of cultural and racial
yeah,
interaction, right? Because they haven't been amongst different cultures to be able to say, "Oh, well, my friend, I went to school with Henry, and Henry is this, that, or another, and Henry was the smartest one in the class. Henry was actually smarter than me," right? To be able to say, "No, we can have the intellect in those various cultures just because we haven't been exposed to it doesn't mean it doesn't exist."
yeah, and a lot of times in IT, what I found is really interesting. In 25 years in IT, I deal with a lot of people from multiple cultures, right? I see a lot of African engineers
Mhm,
from all over Africa. And then you've got some people in America thinking like, well, black folks can't do this. But like I'm
mm,
working with guys from Tanzania, or from
mhm,
Ethiopia, from Nigeria, from like every African,
mhm,
everywhere. And they've
right,
got just as capable as
right,
anybody I've ever seen. But there was this mindset that just overall we
mhm,
couldn't cut it because it was like the social
mhm,
Darwinism, like we can't cut it.
right. It's like, where are the pyramids?
Yeah, where
Just
yeah,
curious,
what about
just
Eritrea?
curious.
Eritrea, the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Cherokee.
Right,
Like there's a lot of
exactly,
history, even in the
exactly.
Americas, of the engineering of the Mayans.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
know, the
Yes,
the thought process of the Cherokee and the Blackfoot and the
mhm,
Navajo, and the depth of their
mhm.
oral histories and their knowledge of the environment, and like
Yes,
and their
yes.
spiritual and ethical and principles
Mhm,
that people
mhm,
today, like, they run to the East to learn things, and there's the same level of depth of knowledge and
mhm,
thinking
mhm,
in the
mhm.
Americas from the indigenous cultures here.
Yes, exactly.
So it's like people just they get themselves into these narrow channels, these narrow
Yeah,
lanes, and
yeah,
what I
because they've never seen it or experienced it, they assume it doesn't exist.
yeah, it's just
Mhm,
cross-cultural,
mhm,
cross-genre,
mhm,
cross like that what people I find a lot of times in the industry, we find neurodivergence.
mhm.
We find people that don't work well in the box,
Oh,
don't
that's
work well
me. Totally
9
me.
9 to 5. We find guys, like, they do their best work from midnight to 3 AM, or
Mhm,
they can't be in the office. They have to they might be in a beach in Bermuda, right?
mhm.
But they can outthink anybody else that's sitting in a
And
box.
they think outside the box, and they can look for creative ways to solve problems. Absolutely.
So the idea that, like, everybody's gotta be in the office to do the
Mhm,
most critical work, and that's not true,
mhm.
because if you deal with the Apples and the
Absolutely.
Googles and the big Amazon, like, data centers, they don't put those restrictions when they have their best employees. They realize, like,
Mhm,
"Oh, these
mhm.
people don't have to be in it, but they
Mhm,
have this idea they have to monitor everybody else, but that's
mhm.
across
It's
the board
control.
for everybody, and so real power is knowledge, right? So
Absolutely.
the library is your free source, like the Google search is your source
Absolutely.
to learn, like, whatever you
Absolutely.
want to.
Yeah, and I've done some of my best creative thinking within the first 10 minutes of waking up. And I'm not a morning person. I get up extra early in the morning because I must move slowly in the morning because I can't just hop out of bed and run around and start doing stuff. I have to get up, have my cup of coffee, decaf, sit at my table, sip it leisurely. And it's interesting how if I were grappling with a problem the night before or something, I wake up and while I'm sitting there in my quiet space, having my decaf coffee, I go, oh, idea. Okay, I got
Yeah.
it. I've solved the problem. That didn't happen between 9 to 5. That was at 5:20 when I'm sitting at my table and 5:20 in the morning.
You know, like, a lot of times things when I deal with a lot of creative people, people think things are linear. What I
Mhm.
find a lot of times is the creative process is not linear.
No,
So
it's
a lot of
not.
times it's all over the place, and I've dealt
Mhm.
with a lot of creative people where, they're throwing things like not like at the dartboard, but there's an idea. Like they're
Mhm.
taking like you take a whiteboard, you
Mhm.
throw all these things on the whiteboard.
Mhm. Mhm.
Or they're like, a guy like Frank Zappa, he used to like is a musician example. He used to record everywhere. He used to record on stage, in the studio, anywhere, and then have these tapes and go back to his living room and then throw all the
And
tapes
mix
on,
them.
on the floor and just take them from different time periods, different places, and start to cut them together and piece them
Mhm.
together like a
A montage of sounds.
montage. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that became like this, like, a lot of people started looking at these type of recording methodologies.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
writers will do that, they'll kinda move things around on the
Mhm.
timeline, so it's not
Yes.
sequential, so it becomes more
Yes.
interesting.
Yes, you get foreshadowing, you get flashbacks, and in terms of that montage you're talking about, the idea of working creatively within the realm of education, taking different segments of your learning and pulling them together to problem solve, which is what I did with the credit recovery program that I
Mm,
came up with at my school site through the process of working on my PhD. I was like, well, we learned about standards based learning, and then we've been doing this work in order to align our grade level expectant, what we expect students to know at each level. How about we put that together and come up with a credit recovery program? And I pitched it to my admin, and they were completely on board. And now it's in its third year of running. The teachers have autonomy. They've been invested with the power and the trust to run this program. And admin is happy because students are recovering credits. They're graduating on time. They're graduating A through G. Yeah. So you have to be able to give people the flexibility to work within their area of expertise and the trust that they will come up with a solution
well, it's
that's
like the
nonlinear.
well, it's individualism, right, and customization, and what I
Yes.
find is a lot of times people get stuck in this idea that they want these repeatable processes, they want step 1 through 10, you can't deviate,
Mm-mm.
and it's
And
very
not everything is meant to be cookie cutter.
yeah, and it's like people don't act they want people, the thing is the Industrial Revolution kinda set things up that people gotta be on this
Yep.
assembly line, and it actually
Yep.
went from the assembly line in the factory to the assembly line in the office,
Yes.
and it really doesn't work because of
Not for
how
everything.
but you end up phoning it in. You end up not being engaged, and if you
Mhm.
have tons of people who are not engaged and not really you're not really human beings are meant to be in this very static, highly controlled
Mhm.
atmosphere. We're meant to be challenged.
Mhm.
We're meant to think
Absolutely. I get
that
bored and will check out. I'd be
yeah,
like, "Are
you
we
check
still
out.
here? I
Yeah,
can't do it."
how are you gonna get and they wonder where you get these, like, amazing ideas come from the people who are not locked into the box.
Absolutely.
But then they go
Absolutely.
and they say, "Well, let's take that creative person and then put them in a box,
And
label
now
them bottle."
you are drilling the creativity out of them when you do that.
It doesn't work. I mean, I used to be a road warrior. and they used to have to fly Sunday to Thursday.
Uh-huh.
And that was the box they put us in, that we had to do
Mm,
that. And
mm,
what they found is eventually, when the pandemic came, we found that we had to be, like, kinda locked down, and we were working
mhm,
remotely.
mhm,
But working remotely, I work with people in Japan, in
mhm.
Germany, in Poland, in
And you
Latin.
were probably much more productive because now you aren't jet lagged.
Yeah, and then I'm able to, different, like, sometimes I gotta get up at 6 in the morning and talk to somebody in Japan,
Right,
or they talk to me at 7 at night. To me,
right.
it's at some point, but the fact is I get to work with these international teams without having to
Mhm,
fly to Japan, and
mhm,
I lived in Japan back in the day, and I did love being
mhm,
there. I was actually able
mhm.
to stay there for 2 years, and so there's a benefit to travel, but that travel I like because I didn't have to just fly back. I was there for 2 whole years. That's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
different thing. Like, if you get to be in the environment
Mhm,
and actually
mhm.
learn the cross-cultural, like, concepts of, like, if you're living in Japan, you have to learn how to
Immerse yourself in the
get in a
in the
taxi and
culture.
tell the taxi how to get somewhere. So you have to learn how to say that, right?
Yeah.
Or you're not gonna be able to get there. So it's like learning that the language differences,
Mhm,
with the Japanese language, it was like more of a symbolic language than
mhm,
our language.
mhm,
Like with katakana and hiragana and the kanji, the symbols are pictograph type of symbols.
mhm,
And if you look at the symbol for like water, the actual kanji, I mean, kanji for water looks like actually like a stream or a lake.
mhm,
So there's certain things about language when you start to see other cultures, like, wow, there's actually this understanding, like, hey, this actually came from like a really old mindset. The
mhm, mhm,
symbols would represent real things,
mhm,
not be abstract. So it just gave a different point of view. It's like when you actually have Japanese literature, there's a lot of meaning that is just in the symbol itself,
mhm,
not just from the definition of the word.
mhm,
But it just gets you like into this, like, oh, there's a mind expanding
mhm,
effort there when you start to see, like, oh, this is how they see it. This is their point of view, instead of just thinking your point of view is the only point of view.
mhm, mhm,
But from when you're dealing with people who maybe like their point of view is it's boring, like reading is boring, right? And so how do you we kind of talked about, like, you get them engaged in something they're interested in.
mhm. Yeah, I like to give them choice in terms of what we're going to read. And what I really like to do is introduce them to the 8 critical lenses, the lenses through which we can see ourselves and look at the literature. And I found that gives them a new way to be introspective as well as critically analyze text, looking at it through the lens of social economics, looking at something through the lens of racial issues, looking at something through the lens of culture. It really helps them expand their understanding, and it they find nuances to talk about in the literature. Absolutely.
And then it starts to expand their vocabulary and
Mhm,
expand their
mhm.
their their
Understanding of the world.
yeah, because
One of the things I like to tell them is that literature was not created in a vacuum. There was something that was going on that sparked the author to write this piece of literature. And just as they wrote it outside of a vacuum, here we are reading it, and we're not in a vacuum. Our experiences, our lens shapes our interaction with the literature, and so we can actually see those two ideas merge. There's things that we may understand from the author's perspective because it mirrors ours, or there are things we may not understand that is in opposition to our experiences that then expands our horizons. So that's one of the nuances I really like to bring to the discussions in my classroom.
so you get people to look at the context of the time period it was written in, and
Yes, we
the
love to look
context
at
of
things in the context and discuss our own context. And sometimes we're reading something and we say, well, what's similar about the context, the historical context there, and what's similar with our historical context? Are we still grappling with the same problems 100 years later?
Yeah, well, that's the thing about history when you start reading history,
Mm-hmm.
beyond, like, fiction, and
Mm-hmm.
honestly, I love I was a political science major, so learning about political systems and the history
Mm-hmm.
behind it, rationales and
Mm-hmm.
just concepts, but, like, you look at, a lot of things today is, like, you see people aren't learning the lessons of the
Mm-hmm.
1940s,
Mm-hmm.
because people seem to, like they don't think history's important, so
Well,
they don't remember the lessons learned.
I think some of that, my daughter happens to be a US history teacher at the eighth grade level. And some of the conversations we've had is about how history is taught. Are you teaching it linearly or are you teaching it thematically? And a teacher has to make those decisions. And of course, a district has a lot of say over whether how that is happening. But bringing historical context absolutely is important. One of the units I'm working on right now with my juniors, it's a rhetoric unit, and we started off with commercials, right? What's going on? What literary appeals do we see? Ethos, logos, pathos. And then we looked at Super Bowl commercials, right? And
Mhm.
now we've moved into what's considered US seminal documents. So we've looked at the Gettysburg Address. We looked at the preamble to the Constitution. And now we're reading Frederick Douglass's speech, What to the Slave is Fourth of July.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very interesting to that Douglas makes that connection between the Declaration of Independence, and then the Constitution, and just the 76-year time difference from when he's given his speech. And it's jaw-dropping to say we were proud, we were boastful, we said we're going to get our freedom, and by golly, we did it. He said, but it's your freedom. It's
Yeah.
your holiday. And it's very interesting to now have the students, we just made it to that section where he's saying it's your holiday, it's your freedom. That particular day does nothing than to stand out above all other 365 days, the inequities and the injustice that the enslaved face on a daily basis. And if you're looking at the students' faces, they're like, okay, that was heavy. And you got to pause and reflect on that and say, okay, well, we don't have slavery today, but what do we have that is indicative of the divide of Douglas's audience? So we talk about soapstone, right? Talk about subject, occasion, and audience. Who was his audience? And in what audience might he still be delivering similar words today? And their wheels start turning. And so that makes history a little more relevant when you can connect the ideas. While they may not be identical, there are still underlining themes that are still relevant today.
Well, underlying conditions, you have the condition
Yes,
of the
yes,
African American within the American context, you read the
yes,
Constitution, and we're
absolutely,
three-fifths of a human, and
absolutely.
it never was amended, never was it taken out.
Right,
So what is
right,
the power of that? Like, when you look at a document and it's revered as, like, a holy document,
right.
and
Yeah,
then you see the contradiction, which I think Frederick Douglass and a lot of
hypocrisy.
people, it's like the
Yes,
contradictions of talking about this freedom, but is it only for landed, like, nobles?
right,
Is it really because women didn't have the right to vote?
right.
A lot of regular workers probably couldn't vote.
You had to
The
be
the
you had to
landlord
be a
probably could vote.
landowner.
The
Right,
landowner could vote, but, like, the person who was indentured servant, they probably couldn't vote.
right.
So, and
Yes.
then what happens is people didn't look at, like, you start looking at class, race,
Mhm.
and position, sex, you
Yep,
start looking at the dichotomy of, like, what does this document say? From the
right.
Federalist Papers to the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution.
Mhm.
And then look at what the inequities, and just if you study, you could run the numbers.
Mhm.
You could
Yes.
look at, like, what is the percentage of ownership of average African American? What is
Mhm.
what is their level of wealth? What is their level of
Mhm.
education? What is their level of
Absolutely.
ownership? And then check over the years, from 1865 to
And
2020.
watch that gap get
Yeah,
wider and wider.
right, right.
Yes.
And then
And
you look at the overall gap of even the regular blue collar today,
mhm.
and
Yes,
you look at the oligarch or the billionaire class or trillionaire
yes,
class.
yes,
We've never seen as much inequity.
right?
When you see that, you get French Revolution type of reactions.
Yes,
Historically, like
absolutely.
it usually doesn't stand if you have that
Mhm.
level of inequity. It just
Absolutely,
societies don't work.
absolutely. Yes, and I teach at a school that is predominantly minorities. So we're having conversations that are pertinent to their everyday lives.
Yeah, because a lot of times people look at things and then they just, well, I don't understand what
Mhm,
W. Du Bois was saying because it's like above my head.
mhm.
And it's like, yeah, the language is older. It's an older type of form of English,
Right, we
and
don't
maybe
speak
just
the same way
we don't talk
today.
like that. But then there's a lot of value in
Mhm,
trying to, it's like maybe you don't want to read Shakespeare, but
mhm,
W.B. Du Bois, I would argue
mhm.
you should
Ralph
get it.
Ellison,
Yeah, Ralph
absolutely.
Ellison. You have to kind of get
Yes, James
beyond
Baldwin,
the
I can't wait to teach
presentation.
The Fire next time.
Yeah,
I absolutely cannot wait to teach it.
yeah, because the hesitation is like, well, I can't get into it because it's too heady. It's too heavy. I
Mhm.
can't. They're not getting to the point. But okay, I get it. But there's some level of I think there's like if discipline. Like if you're an athlete, right, you don't immediately get that 3-point shot. You
Right.
got to put your 10,000 hours in to get to be doing those
Exactly.
plays with the muscle memory.
Malcolm Gladwell, I get that reference. Yes.
So you like even though it's so if it's hard, you can get around the sports. If you're a musician, you could get around learning how to play that bass. You know that to not look at the fretboard, you got to put the hours in. It's the same thing with reading W.E. Du Bois.
Absolutely.
You got to
Absolutely.
put the work in.
And that's one of the things that we do talk amongst my colleagues who also teach 11th grade. What we notice with them in terms of lacking that grit, lacking that stamina to sit down and be willing to press through for something that may not be easily understood in its first reading. You have to be willing not to check out.
And I think it's
Yeah.
hard today because like in the 70s, like I'm a child of the 70s, like I didn't have my cell phone.
We
I
didn't
didn't
have the
have the
same
tech. I didn't have
distractions.
the internet. I didn't have satellite TV, satellite radio. You have so many
155 million channels from
yeah,
the East Coast to the West Coast. You mean I could watch this twice? I could watch it on West Coast time and then on East Coast time? What?
but it's a matter of discernment. Like, like
Mhm,
if you're gonna go get that bachelor's degree, you're gonna get your master's degree, you
mhm.
can't be plugged in to that phone and you're gonna have to do it, right? If you're on
Yeah,
in that class
discipline.
in your repetitive training as an athlete, you're not talking about how long I gotta look at my smartphone while you're trying to make that play.
Right,
So it's
right.
like you have to relate it to like I know it's like you can get your head around learn how to be a football
Mhm,
player or a basketball player
mhm,
or any of the other disciplines like that.
mhm,
You can get your head around that. Well, you got to get
mhm.
your head around these other things because we don't
Right,
want to just be relegated to entertainment and sports.
right.
Like,
And I tell them that adulting is a lot about doing things not because you want to, but because you have to. There are things as an adult you just have to get done. You think I like sitting down paying bills? It's boring, but I have to do it. It's one of those adult chores that we have to do. And it's a rough road sometimes. I'm fortunate that I learned a couple of tricks in trade, a couple of tricks of the trade. So, for instance, I give my students tech talk time. So
mhm,
they get 2 minutes at the beginning of the class, the middle of the class, and at the end of the class where they can talk to their friends off topic. They can get out their cell phone or do whatever. But the expectation is that when it's not tech talk time, it's put away, not on your desk because you're going to be tempted, but I mean away.
put away,
And if
yeah,
I catch you on it when it's not tech talk time, I'm taking it.
yep. Well, I think that's necessary because it's such a distraction that
It
it's like
is.
really gonna that you got to have a certain level of discipline.
And they also will reach for it without even thinking.
It's
It's
automatic.
secondhand now. It'll be there and they'll just reach out and they'll just be, "Oh, what are you doing? Oh, I'm sorry, my bad. I didn't even realize I did it. Okay, let me help you out because you need my help. Put it over there in the cell phone pocket." Yeah.
Even in the
And
music
so
wo yeah, even in the music world, like, a lot of times, like, if you I'm a producer, like, I tell my musician that are in the studio, like, "Put the cell phone away,"
you have to. You
because,
have
like,
to.
because it will even distract from the recording session, because
Yeah.
people will not be paying attention. It's like,
Mhm.
and if you're trying to be in a flow state, you're trying, so I even tell, like, vocalists, they're doing their vocals in the vocal booth, "Don't use the cell phone
Mm.
to read your lyrics.
Mm.
Put it away and do it the old school way." Which
Mm.
is, read your lyric
Paper.
sheet ahead of time and then come in and kind of do it that way, because it's bit more like an actor who learns their lines.
Mhm. Mhm.
You're actually gonna, because when you start looking at the phone, it's so distracting that you don't actually do your vocal performance. You might think you're doing it, but you don't do it
You're
right.
not really delivering it with
You're
the
not really
same
delivering it
emotion.
because you have
Mhm.
to kinda think like the actor,
Mhm. Mhm.
and you have to, and so these tools are so distracting
Mhm.
from people actually being present,
Yeah.
and
And
being present
I
is super important.
Yes, and I think it's also important that I model for my student my expectation. So my cell phone is either in my desk drawer or on the corner of my desk, but I'm not a sit at my desk teacher. I'm up, I'm moving around, I'm talking and doing things. So it's important for them to see that I too.
You're living in what you're not just doing as they say.
Yes, I'm not a
Yes.
hypocrite. I put mine away too. And I also let them know that we're humans. We have a life outside of school. So if there's something going on and you think for some reason you might need your cell phone, let me know. You can come to me at the beginning of the class and say, "Hey, my grandma went to the hospital this morning. I'm expecting
Mhm.
my mom to call and let me know what's going on. When that phone call comes, can I go outside?" So I'll say, "Okay, just put it on the corner of your desk." And sure enough, it'll ring, they'll pick it up and they'll do like this. And I'll just say, "Go out." And my caveat with them is when my children call, my world stops. So I won't get on my phone unless it's my child. But if it's my child, I'm going to take the
Yeah,
phone.
it makes
Or if
sense.
there's something going on, I said, "Hey, I'm expecting the mechanic to call me about my car. And when it comes, I'll let you know." So I model for them my expectation. And that's also about teaching them how we have those open lines of communications with people that we're collaborating with. We assume a lot that our students should have those general means of communicating expectation, communicating their needs, but we can't make that assumptions. We have to teach them and we have to give them the opportunity to practice those skills. Oh, my phone call came, I'm stepping outside, because we're supposed to be preparing them for life outside or life after high school. So they'll know how to have communicate when they're in a business meeting. I'm expecting an important call. When it comes, I'm going to take it out.
Yeah, the
And
etiquette. You're teaching them kinda like
yes,
the
you
etiquette.
have to.
You're teaching
You
them, like,
have to.
the real life situation where it's
Real
not just
life skills.
skills of learning how to have social grace.
Yeah. You
Because
know,
the social graces are super important, because some people
yeah.
have,
Soft skills we refer to them as. Uh-huh.
yeah, because a lot of times
Absolutely.
we're not taught this a lot, because people
Mhm.
forget. They forget to tell
Mhm.
people, like, the expectations of,
Mhm.
civic duty, like,
Right.
and just common sense when the common sense is not so common. And
Right. It isn't so common. Sometimes we have to teach it.
yeah, because it's not always obvious. A lot of people say, "Well,
Mhm.
that's obvious." Like, well, if you don't actually set out your expectations,
Right.
it's really communication, listening skills.
It
People make
is.
a lot of assumptions. I learned, like,
Right.
sociology, like microcosm, macrocosm.
Right.
Like, if
Mhm.
your father has this expectation, like, you know how to act, but did he actually tell you
Right.
what he expected the code to be?
Right. Mama did when we go in the store. Don't ask for nothing. Don't touch nothing because you're not getting nothing. Mama knew how to do it.
Yeah, but Pop might not tell you. He says, "So you just know
Yep.
that's wrong." He said, "How did
Right.
I know, Dad? Did you ever tell me?"
Right.
I just know. What did I
Exactly.
know?
You assumed.
So, yeah, and it's like that is the communication. That are you actually talking past people or
Mhm.
actually listening?
And are you
Listening.
teaching?
Yeah, listening and teaching, and even people don't even listen to themselves
Mhm.
because we talk about a lot of times like with people therapists is like people have this negative self talk.
Yes.
And if you
Yes.
feel like, "Well, I can't ever reach that." Like, if you
Mhm.
actually hate from somebody in a session, how many times they said never, can't, no,
Absolutely.
like, it's like, well, who is somebody else stopping you, or are you stopping
Mhm.
yourself?
It's very interesting that you talk about that negative self-talk. And it can even come up in what we see as the most innocuous or innocent ways. I recalled and had to teach myself to not say a particular thing, lazy, in reference to myself. So you talk to your girlfriends, what are you doing today? Oh, girl, I'm just going to sit around the house and be lazy. And one time I caught myself, I said, as hard as I work, I don't care if I decided to sit in my room and do nothing but eat snacks and sit on my couch and watch TV for a week. I still could never be lazy. So I had to catch myself and say, oh, I'm resting today.
Give yourself grace. You give yourself grace because, you know, I
No,
think.
not to me, it's beyond grace. It's beyond grace. It's being truthful with ourselves,
Mm,
you know, and saying I'm resting today. Be intentional about resting. And what brought me to that is I'm very good about getting enough sleep, getting 7.5. I like 8, but I'm real good with 7.5. And one particular day I said, I am tired. I don't know why I'm tired. I'm getting enough sleep. And the other side of my brain said, you didn't say you were sleepy, you said you were tired. You're getting enough sleep, but you're not getting enough rest.
mm.
It's intentionality.
Yeah, that's important because people burn
Mhm.
themselves out and they think they're
Yes.
obligated to be in the grind, and then they don't
Mhm.
give themselves enough time to recover.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not enough time to rest or engage in self-care or engage in hobbies that make them happy. That's important.
Yeah, and, like, and a lot of times, like, in terms of, like, if you're a musician, you could get on a grind where your manager goes and sets you up for a tour
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
unrealistic. You go
Mhm.
into Detroit, you go into Chicago, you go
Mhm.
into Minneapolis, and you go boom,
Mhm.
boom, boom, boom.
Mhm.
There's no break,
Absolutely.
no breaks,
Absolutely.
and you're, like, gun ho because 'cause you're happy to have the work,
Mhm.
but, like, you're gonna crash.
Right.
And you have to kinda push for your own sanity. It's like,
Right.
I don't wanna be a jerk here, but
Right.
you're running me ragged.
Yes, you have to draw your boundaries and say, these right here, I need a break. I know this 8 month tour looks fantastic, but you're not the one that's doing it. So, what I'm gonna need is a break right here and a break right here.
Yeah, and it's not really like, once people put boundaries, people think it's like they can't get that. It's like the people who get it because they tell people what they can't do. And people will say, well,
Yes,
they won't know that you can't do it until you tell them you can't do it, right? It's like where you tell them, like, "I
absolutely.
don't, this is my boundary. You're pushing
Right,
a little too hard."
right,
Yeah, and I'm not lazy.
right.
It's like, I want to be
Absolutely.
able to perform for the
And
people in this city as good as I did in that city, and if you
yes,
do that, my quality's gonna drop, and that's gonna mess up my
yes,
brand. So if you wanna know what I'm
yes.
talking about, that's what I'm talking about.
Exactly. And I had a conversation with a couple of my high schoolers the other day. I said, every day you teach people how to treat you by what you will and will not accept. And they sat for a second and they go, hey, you ate with that one. I was like, okay. Yes, every day you teach people how to treat you by what you will and will not accept.
Do you find that you have to teach the parents and the children of the parents, I mean, or have the conversation so there's, like, that communication between you, the parent, and the child, and cross communication to everybody? I mean,
It's
is that kinda like, synergy or understanding?
It has happened on a few occasions, but I haven't needed to do it often. We do have back to school night at the beginning of our school, year. And I unfortunately find that I get less than 20% of my students come in with their parents. And usually it's the students who they have a lot of grit and they have a lot of tenacity, and they're not the ones who I'm going to have those tough conversations with their parents later on. And those times where I had to call home and have those tough conversations, I've been received very well. I haven't had any of those situations where some teachers have had where the parents just couldn't believe it and the parent want to mouth off to the teacher. I haven't had those
Mm.
situations. I have had a couple of times where one or two phone calls home didn't solve the issue, and so I've had to ask for a parent teacher conference. And at the end of those, we were able to be on the same page. So I do thank God, whoo, that I haven't had one of them parents, because it's not going to work out well for that parent.
But this whole idea, kind of, we talked about it a little earlier. I'm going to dive a little bit further into the credit recovery,
Mhm.
and in terms of how does that program work, and what does it really mean? Like, what are the components of that? What?
Okay. Well, credit recovery, anytime a student is taking a class and they have failed that class, they need to recover those credits because they'll be shy either in terms of the specific class that they needed for graduation, or they possibly could be shy just in having enough credits. And teaching English language arts, our high schoolers are required to have passed 4 years of English, ninth through 12th grade. And so if a student has failed ninth grade or 10th grade English, they have to recoup those credits. They're not graduating. And prior to the credit recovery program that I came up with, we were using two specific methods for students to recover credit. Either they were sitting through the class again, taking the whole semester or the year that they needed to recover credit, or they were taking it through an online platform, Edgenuity. Well, we found out that some of our students were cheating. They were just looking up the little test answers online, and they were cheating their way through it. And we are in favor of giving you another opportunity, but not an opportunity to
Cheat? No,
cheat
no.
and be dishonest. So through my PhD program, I was thinking about some concepts that our English department had already came utilized in terms of what was our expectations of skills we needed students to master at the end of ninth grade to be successful at 10th grade, the end of 10th grade to be successful of 11th grade. We call that our grade level alignment. And I said, well, we also were exploring, I've been utilizing mastery based grading practices in my class where students receive the grade based upon specifically mastering the skills and the standards that we are teaching. It's not behavioral based, it's strictly on what evidence you have produced of your learning and achieving the objectives. So I said, well, I went to my admin. I said, well, what if we could pull these two things together and have a credit recovery program where students aren't cheating online and they don't need to retake the whole class? Because if you failed ninth grade English, you went on to 10th grade English. Then you went on to 11th grade English. So at some point, you've acquired the skills. It just took you a little longer to get there. So we don't need to put you back in ninth grade English because you've already mastered 11th grade skills. But I do need to assess you on these 5 specific tasks that show your mastery of the ninth grade standards. And
Hmm.
she said, well, what would that look like? I said, well, let me go and pull together some materials and I can come and show you visually what I mean. And I brought those back to her. And Miss Johnson was like, yeah, I'm on board. If your team is on board, I'm on board. So I went to the English language department. I was like, okay, we know that they're cheating on Edgenuity. We have too many kids in the class that need to retake. What about this program? And I laid it out for them in a presentation. And they said, I like it. Yeah, let's do it. And it basically, based upon the grade level, the number of tasks a student needs to demonstrate mastery of. For ninth grade, there's 4 tasks. For 10th grade, there's 5. For 11th grade, there's 6. But 12th grade is a little more meatier because they're reading multiple texts and then juxtaposing those to perform a few tasks. And so the credit recovery teacher has a period that is specifically given to them where they are calling students just to recover credit in either ninth, 10th, or 11th grade. And so they call that student in and say, okay, I need you to demonstrate these skills. I'm going to call you in. You're going to sit down. You're going to do the task. When you're done, we're going to schedule the next time you're going to come in. And we're able to work around whatever class they're supposed to be in that particular class. The
Oh, wow.
student may say, well, I can't come on Tuesday because we're expected to have a math class. Can I come on Thursday? Absolutely, you can come on Thursday. And so once the student has done all the tasks, the credit recovery teacher grades them all, scans them, and sends them to the teacher of record who's going to sign off on the grade change. The teacher of record reviews everything and say, yeah, they did demonstrate they have mastered these skills. I'm going to go ahead and put in for the grade to be changed based upon this level of mastery. And so it doesn't cost our school extra money because we're not buying licenses for the online credit recovery. And we're also now not packing our classes full of students who need to retake the
The whole
class.
class, like, so you're actually
Yeah,
going and doing a real skill assessment,
a skill
kinda like
assessment of mastery of specific task.
kinda
Yes.
like corporate America, that we actually like somebody, like, comes into a job, we might, assess them, "Do you know SQL Server?" And we'll
Right.
actually test them and ask them some really key points of SQL Server, and then they if they pass it,
Absolutely.
then they get it, and they go, so if somebody doesn't have this on their resume, right, but they said, "Well, I've
Right.
done it for 5 years, but I never took the course."
Right.
So they'll make an
Exactly.
assessment. Oh, do you know COBOL?
Right.
Do you know use case method? Do you know Agile? Do you know
Exactly.
this? So they'll do a real test,
A live assessment.
live
Same as
assessment.
with within the school district to have different levels of your secretarial jobs. You need to be able to type certain words per minute. So
Mhm.
you come in and you arrange, you do your typing test and say, oh, you type X words, so you qualify for this tier within the secretary service. Absolutely.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, in business, you can even get college credits if you've been in business and you've been doing the work.
Hmm.
You can get
Hmm.
in get toward your project management
Yeah.
certification because you actually been doing it,
Yes.
right? So, like, if you
Yes.
start to do kinda like what the corporate world does,
Yeah.
and we do these assessments that are kind of
Yes.
efficient because we don't wanna waste money because we're
Exactly.
all about the money. So we do things that try to be cost effective.
Yes.
Return on
Yes. Be
investment.
efficient.
Return on investment's the big thing, like,
Yes, yes. And so this is our credit recovery program is in its third year of running. The very first year, we started a little later in the year. We didn't start till about October. So we had about 47, if I'm remembering correctly, 47 students who recovered credit from ninth through 11th grade. And then the second year, we had about 65. And now it's in its third year. We had 65 already recover credit so far in this year.
that's really amazing 'cause, like, it's just interesting that, that there's a way to keep the kids from falling off the cliff,
Yes.
because a lot of times, like, if they
Yes.
just, they never they have to go and get their GED,
Yes.
it'd be better if you could keep them from having to do that. If you
Exactly.
actually could save them
Exactly.
before they fall off the cliff, and then they don't come back for a long time, and it takes a
Yeah.
while to get
Yeah.
back to that, and make
Absolutely.
and that just
And the
helps society.
students are appreciative. They're like, wow, thank you so much. The very first year when we were running it, I had to, of course, introduce it to the students. I had a slideshow presentation, say, this is what it's all about, because it was new. It was nothing they'd ever heard of before. But once they'd completed it, they were like, and you came up with this? Oh my God, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to get back on track.
Well, because it seems like some folks are so into just, like, well, just, like, measure the people,
Mhm.
figure out who failed, and, okay, we figured out who failed, and we saw who succeeded, and just take the people who succeeded and push them on, and the ones that dropped off, well, I guess they'll end up somewhere else.
Mhm.
And in this, from a society perspective, like, if you don't want people, like, not being able to participate in society. You
Absolutely.
want to be able to, and this is where some folks might not, like, in IT today, sometimes we don't necessarily bring people in that have bachelor's degrees, but they might have gone to Amazon and got an AWS certification online and figured out how to actually certify
Mhm.
technical skills. And then they'll get to come in at a lower level, but they actually get in. And then
Mhm.
by being in the business,
Mhm.
eventually they might go get their associates, they might get their bachelor's,
Mhm.
but they're able
Mhm.
to get in the door and actually do the work.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so it's not that you necessarily, you want people to go get their bachelor's, but there are ways to actually bring people in and have
Mhm.
them get into the field
Mhm.
and
Almost like an internship, but a
yeah,
paid internship because you're
yeah, pay
making money on the job training. Yeah.
yeah, you can so it's that you can salvage a person and not have them fall off the cliff
Yes, help them salvage their dignity. Yeah.
because it's like not everybody's ready to do that, in the same way people go get a plumber's license or electrician's license, but they didn't get a BA. We find that some technical skills, like some kids can get into that. They can learn the
Yeah,
system, they can learn the .NET, they can
absolutely.
learn the blockchain tech, they could actually
Mhm.
learn prompt engineering.
Mhm.
No, we
Mhm.
find there's sometimes we get the kind of, the kid is ends you don't want 'em being a hacker, but if you
Mhm.
find them that they actually can code and they just seem to have an affinity for coding, but they don't like
Mhm.
the structure of the classroom.
Right.
Where they get brought in because like, "Hey, this guy actually is finding the vulnerabilities in our system."
Mhm.
So they have this natural hacker tendency and say, "Well, let's actually put them to work in
Mhm.
security analysis to see where if they can
Mhm.
find the open areas in our system." Because that's
Yes.
what they figured out how to do. So it's like, okay,
Mhm.
then we bring them in, then we try to bring them, align them later by getting them to go eventually
Mhm.
get
Mhm.
their degree. But and
Mhm.
as they get further into it, they do get it. And so it's like you can still keep the door open,
Mhm.
which is what it seems like you're keeping the door open. You're still
Yes.
closing the door.
Bec yes, we don't wanna punish students just because they didn't master something the first time, right? We wanna give them the opportunity to still grow through the exposure of the skills, and then once they have mastered it, just come back and retest.
Well, yeah, that's a sequential thinking again, because like sometimes
Mhm.
not everybody's in the same at the same place.
And we already know through all the testing that happens, that's definitely the case. They're not all in the same place at the same time. And not only that, we have English language learners on top of that. So we have to be able to be flexible. But I like it in terms of keeping high expectations, but high support. I'm not going to lower the bar for you, but
Mhm.
I will help you get over the bar.
Yeah, I think that's where people make the mistake. They think they were actually lowering the bar,
No,
that's not the case. Like,
no.
and then they suspect people's qualifications. That's been like the
Mm,
big thing I've always had to deal with being the only guy in the room.
mm.
Like people was like, "Oh, you came from affirmative action, or you came from
Mhm.
DEI."
Mm,
But it's like
mm, mm.
for me to be the only person in the room, I had to outperform you.
Exactly, and we can't forget the demographics that say Black women are the most educated. Hey!
Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, and it's just so infuriating to people just by my presence.
Mhm,
I'm
mhm.
unqualified, and we've got to get people to actually like let's look at the facts.
Let's look at the facts.
Let's look at what I am actually doing.
Mhm. Let's teach you something.
Let's look at for you're talking about you want it to be performance based. You want it to be well. Then
If it
let
was
me see.
performance-based, honey, you're the one that might not be in the room,
Well, that's
right?
the question I have. It's like I remember when I was at Bowdoin, and we had a lot of legacy students, and people know what that is,
Mm, mhm,
and
mhm.
they weren't getting more than 2.0s,
Right.
and you're just assuming that this guy. And I saw some of these legacy 2.0s getting into boardrooms over people who were 4.0s.
Right.
So I'm like, it's not all based on your performance, because I've seen it.
Right.
I've been in corporate America
Act
for 25 years, and I've been
Yep,
in the room with the
yep.
people that didn't have the skill set,
Uh-huh.
but knew somebody in the golf course.
Yes, yes. It's very interesting once, the law was passed that no longer could college consider race in college admissions. And there were a lot of people who thought that Black admissions would drop significantly because we didn't deserve to be there, to find out that it fell a tiny, tiny smidgens, but there were a lot of other racial demographics who fell more.
Yeah. Well, it's just
Yeah,
my whole thing is like,
because
look at
we've
what
outperformed.
people do, because if you once you get the passion, you want to do it. Like you want to be a doctor, you want to be a lawyer, you
Mhm,
want to be an engineer, you want to be biologist, you want to get it, and you people want that. They want to get to that place.
mhm.
And if people are
They're
passionate about what they
driven.
want to do,
Yes.
you should give opportunities for people who are showing aptitude, interest,
Aptitude and
passion,
interest.
you
Yes.
know, a real feel for it, and not just give it
Absolutely.
to your friends.
Right, right. Legacy admissions wasn't for us, let's just say.
Yeah, it's like, is this guy, his qualification is what? They he was, oh, his father owns the company.
Mhm.
So that's why he gets
Right,
it's like,
right,
what's that got to do with him being able to do it? Because his grandpa could do it, doesn't mean that he could do it. But
right.
it's like this genetic, like, it's just genetics. It's like with grandpa
Making
is
some assumptions.
yeah, it's like that's not always the case.
Indeed, indeed.
But I wanna thank you for being on the show today. It always goes by quicker than we ever imagined.
I
We
know,
do
right?
have your link, drvalcinebrown.live-website.com. If people click on that, what do they find there?
Oh, that is my website. Sorry, I toned out for it. Like I went, boop. It's
Mhm.
my ADHD. I was like, what are we talking about?
No, I just wanna
Oh,
make
that
sure
is my website. So they will be able to find my blog. They'll find research information or information about upcoming research. They'll also find information about various events that I'll be attending, which I actually will be speaking and presenting my doctoral research at ERA coming up in Denver, Colorado at the end of April.
that's awesome.
Yes.
That's
And
awesome.
I do want to say, first of all, Phantom, thank you so much for taking this time to interview me today. I appreciate this very much. And I also, if there are any teachers out there, administrators at the high school level, I want to encourage you to check out my book, Credit Recovery Through Demonstration of Mastery. You can find it through my website, and you can also find it on Amazon.
That's awesome. And I wanna let people know that that link I just mentioned, drvalcinebrown.live-website.com, is fully clickable in the description of the podcast. We've just been live on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, but on all the other platforms like Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon podcasting, that will be the same case. And you'll be able to click through. And we do encourage people to click through on the URLs that we have on the podcast to get a deeper dive into what we've talked about today. So thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much, Phantom. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
You as well. Thank you so much.